So now that we've got the basic facts of the case out of the way, we're going to go ahead and move on to part two, which is options, consequences, and decisions. So we have quite a few options available to us. However, I wanted to narrow it down to three, and I wanted to choose some stuff that would kind of build upon each other. So we have option A, which, after some reflection, would enable us to speak to both students first without law enforcement present. This would capitalize on the relationship that was built with James, because sometimes not having law enforcement when you want to have that tense sort of discussion with a student who has been a behavioral in the past, it sometimes helps the situation. Not having law enforcement would also hopefully prevent David's breakdown, and it might enable Richard to clarify consequences for James without ever needing to implicate David, because it was the law enforcement's actual presence within the office that led to David's full sort of handcuffing and so on and so forth. We also have option B, which would be to ensure a more comprehensive follow-up for James. Right now, all that's said in the case is that James has been sent to the program. And while he did break the law, and I believe that the consequence is realistic because brass knuckles are something that can easily lead to killing, uh, this consequence doesn't necessarily mean that the relationship between Richard and James has to be broken. Then finally, we have option C, which is to ask other administrative members for more time to investigate this and for more time to reflect upon this. This all happened within the space of an afternoon. But if we want to be willing to make truly informed choices, then we cannot just react. We have to act based on our own ethics, not based on everything coming at us at once. This would also demonstrate initiative and leadership, and this would capitalize on the ethics of profession. So, when evaluating all of these options, they all kind of narrow down to building a relationship based on trust, which is something that I find most applicable to my own practice. So perhaps all these options that I'm coming up with are biased in that regard. Option A, which is to speak to both students first without law enforcement present, it does keep trust between all three sort of key members involved within the case. Option B would work to keep the trust between Richard and James, with nothing really said for David. And then option C builds trust between Richard and administration. So, when I'm talking about all of these, then I think it's fairly obvious at this point that my choice would be a combination of all three options. So, implementation would look something like this. If Richard first asks administration for a little bit more time to investigate the matter personally, then Richard can demonstrate to his administration that, hey, even though I am a first year school leader, I am prone to more reflective and deep thought than reflexive thought. And then following through on this personal investigation does mean that Richard can attempt to speak with both students without the school's law officer present, because it was mentioned in the case that Richard said, I'm not sure I would do that again, or that was his mindset without the school law officer present. And of course, building on the fact that Richard has worked very hard to successfully build a relationship with James, James then may feel more at ease in speaking with an authority figure without police presence and may confess his part sooner. And without a school law officer present, the likelihood of David's breakdown decreases. If this were my first behavioral infraction and I knew that it was something bad, but I knew that I didn't quite know how to talk about this, and then I walk into the office and, oh my God, there's a police officer, I would have a breakdown too. But if David can instead watch Richard model this very empathetic behavior in his discussion with James, then it might build trust on David's part to go, oh, I'm not in trouble here. This person is just trying to figure out what happened in the situation. So this would also avoid David's non-consenting search, and it would instead provide James with an opportunity to confess of his own volition, kind of like he did in the case already, but with an authority figure that he trusts. And doing this would ensure that Richard is capitalizing on the ethic of care. If James does then confess, but some unpacking is required after that. And that's kind of a norm when you have or it should be a norm, when you have students who are accused of serious behavioral infractions like this. It shouldn't just be, bag them, tag them, they're gone. It requires reflection. We should model that for our students. However, after this confession, once everything in the case was laid out, I probably would call in the school law officer, and I would make it clear what happened and that David was in no way responsible, and that his handcuffing and his expulsion would not be required. And if such things were attempted, then I would call in administration and explain the situation to them. And then if that were not willing to happen, then I would say, all right, put it on my record. That's fine. I would also ask that the school psychologist be brought in, just because such an extreme breakdown. I feel like that's something where we would want psychologists involved. James did break the law, though, and even if Richard had a personal relationship with him, brass knuckles can be deadly. And I wouldn't necessarily argue with James's suspension, but I do think that Richard's responsibility at this point would be to visit James regularly in the alternative program, if he can, or at home, do home visits, in order to emphasize that, yeah, okay, there are consequences to your actions, but that doesn't mean I've given up on you. Yes, this doesn't mean that I have broken my faith in you. I still support you. Yes, David is allowed to remain in school as is, but now, as my job, as Richard, it's my job to set the stage for James's successful reintegration within the school. And I think that that really emphasizes sort of the ethic of care and also the ethic of uh, justice, if you will, because I believe that just just behavior should be met, but it should not act alone, shall I say. So, I think that this is a complicated case, but strong reflection can ensure that Richard will act in an ethical manner. Unfortunately, we're always put into those situations in which the instinct is to react, but not to act proactively, shall we say. And I think that part of becoming a school leader is ensuring that what you are doing is not a reaction, but a measured and reflective and thought action, shall we say. And I think that being a first year school leader, it does make this complicated for Richard. But being able to look at things in those measured ways will help maybe avoid this sort of situation in the future. My resources are as follows. I'm forgetting how to speak English, but thank you for watching this, and I hope it demonstrates this fairly well.